Welcome to the Aligned Ambition podcast. I'm your host, Pooja Venkatraman. I'm a double Harvard grad, former BCG consultant, and now an executive coach for high achievers. On this podcast, we are going to tackle the 4 key things that you need to figure out in order to live a life of aligned ambition. Those 4 things are stress, productivity, performance, and purpose. We are going to make sure that you're driving your car in the direction that you actually want to go. That is the purpose part. We're also going to make sure that your progress along the road is consistent and effective. That's the productivity and performance part. And we're going to make sure that the fuel you're pouring into your tank isn't so noxious that it's filling your car with fumes and making the whole ride miserable. That is the stress part. Because if you can tackle those 4 things, stress, productivity, performance, and purpose, you can build the life and the career that you actually want. Not the life you think you're supposed to have, not the life that burns you out or doesn't fit quite right, but the life you actually want. One that fulfills your biggest ambitions and unleashes your fullest potential without sacrificing your sanity, your relationships, your authenticity, or your paycheck. A life that feels as good on the inside as it looks on the outside. That's what aligned ambition is all about. Let's get started. Hey guys, I'm so excited for this episode. Welcome to 5 unintuitive things that my parents did to raise 2 daughters with 4 Ivy League degrees. So there's a couple things I want to tell you before I jump into the 5 unintuitive things. Thing number 1, I am doing an event coming up this week that goes into way more detail on all of this. I'm so excited for this event. It's called Intergenerational Wisdom for High Achieving Moms. It is a fireside chat with my own mom, as well as Kelly Huang, who is another amazing Asian immigrant mom. She's an HBS MBA, she's a professor, a board leader, and she's raised 2 successful kids. So the first thing I want you to do is register to come to that event. That is your opportunity to hear things directly from the horse's mouth. Get advice from 2 women, 2 high achieving moms with amazing careers who have actually done it, who have raised happy and successful kids. You can ask them all of your questions. You can hear directly from them. You'll also have me in the room translating their advice to help you actually apply it to your life, your situation, and your day-to-day. A ton of my clients are working parents or parents of any kind. And so I have a lot of experience knowing what they should be doing, knowing the things that will be helping them that would make their lives easier and make parenting easier, make their career easier. And I also know exactly the mental blocks that get in my clients' way. So in this fireside chat, you're going to hear the advice from my mom and from Kelly, and then you're going to hear me saying, I know exactly why it's going to be hard for you to implement this advice. I know exactly why you're not already doing this. These are the mental blocks that are stopping you. I'm going to give you the solutions to those blocks right there so you can actually implement the advice that you're hearing in the workshop. So that workshop is coming up on February 12th. If you're listening to this before February 12th, go sign up for the event. I put the registration link in the show notes. And even if you can't make the specific time that the event is, I want you to go ahead and register anyway, because we are going to send a recording of the workshop as well as a summary of the takeaways to every single person who registers. So go register. Even if you can't make it live, you're still going to get the recording. You're still going to get takeaways. And if you are listening to this after February 12th, 2026, I don't know how far in the future you might be listening to it, don't worry, you haven't missed it. I still want you to go to the show notes, and I'm going to have a link for you to be able to get the recording and the takeaways afterward. So if you're listening after the event's already over, you can still get all the juice, you can still get all the value, just go to that link and I'll send you the recording. Okay, that's the first thing I wanted to tell you before jumping into the 5 unintuitive things my parents did. The second thing I wanted to tell you before I jump into things is, I know I hooked you with this title of saying, oh my gosh, it's 2 daughters with 4 Ivy League degrees. That's so amazing. I need to do everything that, that they did. I know I hooked you with that title, but I want to emphasize, it's not just that me and my sister have all of these degrees, right? And all these credentials on our resume. To me, the most important thing is we have those things and we're happy, we're fulfilled, we're having a good time, we're not burning out, we're not wanting to jump out of a window, we're not feeling so restricted and constrained, like, oh my God, I have these golden handcuffs, either of salary or golden handcuffs of prestige, golden handcuffs of compare and despair. Oh, I'm locked in and stuck on this path and I'm so miserable, but this is what I have to do to be successful. That is not where we ended up. And so I think that part is equally important is, the things that my parents did to raise me and my sister and set us on this path. We did a bunch of things that gave us a lot of security, like going to the Ivy League and working at top consulting firms and getting a bunch of great credentials on our resume. And we didn't end up trapped by those things, because a lot of people do end up trapped by that prestige, trapped by their achievements, trapped by their credentials, because they think that now they have only a few things they're allowed to do in their careers. And if they do anything else, that means that they're not successful. So then they do things like, I have to stay on the partner track at my consulting firm, or I have to make it to managing director in my investment bank, or I have to make it to senior VP in the Fortune 500 company I'm in, or I have to start a $1 billion tech startup, right? And they think they have no other options, that that's required to stay successful now that they've kind of hit the success of these certain credentials. And my sister and I did the opposite, right? Or we kind of charted another path. We were able to have those amazing accomplishments, and we were able to say, this empowers me and enables me to figure out what I actually want to do. And so we built these really fulfilling careers that are still really successful, but that are what we actually want. And that gives us fulfillment and meaning and purpose, and actually fills our cup every day, instead of feeling like we're trapped in something that we have to do, but we don't want to do. So I really want you to think about all these 5 unintuitive tips I'm going to tell you. It's not just about getting that external success. It's really about helping you and helping your kids find that Venn diagram intersection of success and fulfillment, a life that looks really good on the outside and feels really good on the inside. That's that magic intersection that everything in my podcast, all of my work, is always trying to aim for. It's all about saying, I don't have to give up one or the other. I don't have to give up success for fulfillment. I don't have to give up fulfillment for success. I can have both of them, and that's what we're aiming for. So that's what all these 5 tips are aimed at. And then the third thing I want to tell you before I jump into the 5 unintuitive things is, all of this applies to you if you're a parent. You can apply this in your parenting for sure. And you can also apply all these things to yourself and how you interact with yourself and how you interact with your own brain. So if you're a parent, you can apply it to your parenting and you can apply it to yourself. And if you're not a parent, you can still apply all of these things to yourself as well. Okay. Those are the things I wanted to tell you. Now let's jump into the 5 unintuitive things my parents did to have 2 kids with 4 Ivy League degrees. So thing number 1 that they did is that they focused on processes, not on outcomes. So you would think, if you want to raise kids that go to the Ivy League, that have all these external markers for success, that you would want to say, okay, that's my goal. So let me now work backwards from that goal and figure out what's everything that they have to do to get those external markers. That's not what my parents did. They weren't aiming for us to go to the Ivy League. This wasn't something that was in our family or in our history. My parents grew up in India, so they didn't have any familiarity with the US, college system. And even in India, you might be familiar, there's a set of schools in India called IIT. It's a whole series of schools, and they're basically like the Indian Ivy League. My parents didn't go to those schools, right? And so we didn't come in with this idea of like, we have to do this. We have to send our kids to the Ivy League. That's the kind of people we are. They weren't aiming for that at all. They were like, what we want to do is focus on making them certain kinds of people. We want to instill certain values and instill certain processes, certain ways of being, right? And so for my parents, the focus was, we want to make them really hardworking. We want to encourage them to do their best in everything they do. And we want them to be really good people, right? And they were like, if they can do that, if they can be hardworking and try their best and be good people, they can figure it out. They can be successful in whatever it is that they end up doing. And so they actually weren't aiming for, here's the outcomes we need our kids to achieve, and now let's plan backward and make that happen. Instead, they were really focused on the process. This is how we want our kids to be. This is how we want them to operate in the world. This is the intuitive process that we want them to follow in all the situations that they encounter. That's what they really focused on instilling. That yielded a really good result. But by the way, all those results, those one-time outcomes, they come and go. Okay, now you have a diploma. Now you have a name on your resume. Now you have an accomplishment. That comes and goes. What really serves you is the process, right? Whatever is the operating model that's instilled in you, that's in your bones, that's in your DNA, that's what actually creates value every single day. That's what informs how you approach all the things on your to-do list and in your life. And that's what my parents focused on, is we have to instill a certain process, a certain way of operating, a certain way of being, a certain way of approaching the world. That's the priority. And if we do that, they'll be fine. They'll be successful where they end up. Right. So all the different things that they had us do, because I still did math worksheets and did extracurricular activities. I did a lot of things in school. But the reason for doing those wasn't, we have to do this so that you can get into Harvard. And if you get a bad grade on a math test, oh my God, now you're not going to get into Harvard. Right. That's not how we approached it. It was more of like, we do these things because we want you to be hardworking and we want you to do your best. And that's it. And so every time, if you as long as you're working towards being that kind of person, you're already winning. right? It's not a problem. And I still remember the first time I ever got like an 89 on a math test. I was in 8th grade. I'd never gotten a bad grade before that I could remember. And I got my very first 89. And I was like, I'd never seen a grade that started with an 8 before. It was always starting with 9s and above for me. And so I my first time seeing like an 89 on a math test. And I was like, what's happening? No. This is not the kind of person I am. I don't get these kinds of results. And I went and I figured out what I did wrong. And I studied really hard. And I made sure I got killer grades for the rest of the year in that class. But what was driving me to do that wasn't this idea of like, oh my gosh, this 89 means I can never get into Harvard, because that's such a fixed and brittle way of looking at things, is like every little outcome means, oh my gosh, this is the altar on which I have to sacrifice myself. And either I do a good job and that means I'm on track, or I do a bad job and that means I'm off track. Instead, what was driving me was like, no, I am not the kind of person that gets these kinds of grades. I'm someone who works hard and gets good outcomes. And if I haven't, I need to troubleshoot what happened and then get back to getting really good grades and getting really good outcomes. And so I was really focused on the process of the kind of person I wanted to be and how I reacted to these kinds of situations, versus thinking, oh my gosh, this means that I'm totally off track for the outcome. And so I might as well just give up, right? Or I have to work myself like crazy to get back on track. It was much more about, well, this is the kind of person I am. This is how I approach these situations. I'm hardworking. I do my best. I get good outcomes. And if that didn't happen, I need to troubleshoot and figure out what happened here so that I can continue, so that I can approach the situation like the kind of person I want to be and continue to apply that process, right, of being hardworking and doing my best. And being a good person, let me apply that to this situation and then figure out how to get good results next time. It's a subtle distinction, right? But what was driving me was not, I have to get to the outcome by any means possible, right? Because the outcome's really far away. Who knows whether I'm going to get there or not, or on what time frame. What was driving me was, this is the process that I apply to all the situations that show up in my life. And that's really immediate, right? I can control the process that I apply right away. And I can see success in that right away because I can know that I successfully applied my process. So that's kind of how that applies. That's an example of how that applied to me. And you can do that with your kids, right? You can do this approach of like, it's not about them getting an A or getting into the honors class or getting into the Ivy League. It's not about those one-time outcomes and sort of like ends justify the means, anything I have to do to get to that outcome. It's much more about what's the process, what's their way of working, way of operating, way of reacting to challenges and obstacles, way of reacting to failure. That's what I'm trying to instill. And then it doesn't really matter where they end up or what the kind of short-term outcomes are, because if I successfully instill that way of working and that way of operating, they're going to be totally fine. And you can also do this for yourself, right? And so let me give you a couple of examples. Let's say you're aiming to get to a promotion, right? Rather than thinking about, well, did I make it or am I not going to make it, right? And like everything I'm thinking about, I'm like, well, I have to perform really well in this meeting, otherwise I'm not going to get promoted. And I have to really perform well in this deck that I'm making, or I'm not going to get promoted. And putting all that outcome pressure on every single moment. The way instead to think about it in terms of processes is to ask yourself, the person who's at that level, right? The version of me that is a partner or is a VP, whatever is the level you're trying to get to, that person at that level, how do they react to the situations that are in front of me, right? How do they think about what the next steps are in this project? How do they take ownership? How do they interact with other people who maybe are giving pushback or wanting to do things in a different way? How do they problem solve? How do they handle meetings? You really think about what's that person's process. How do they approach all the different situations that are in front of them? And then you focus on applying that person's process to your own day-to-day, right? And you focus on becoming like that person every single day versus thinking about, okay, did this meeting get me over the promo finish line? Did this deck get me over the promo finish line? Did I screw it up and now I'm not going to make the promotion anymore? Not thinking about it in an outcome way, but thinking about it in that process way of how does that person that I want to be, the person at that level, how do they approach all these different situations? And let me just start approaching them that way right now. Right. And that way you're always making progress every day and you're getting wins every day because you're applying their process every single day. Or I'll give you another example. If you're trying to just be more productive and be more effective, right? You can ask yourself, that future version of myself who is as productive as I want to be, who's as on top of things as I want to be, how do they handle all the situations that are in front of me? Right? When they have a great plan for the day, but then it gets totally scrambled by a bunch of last minute asks that came up like without warning. What do they do? How do they handle that? Right? Or if they wake up in the morning and they're super tired and they end up having to sleep for an extra couple hours and then they have less time to do everything than they expected. What do they do? How do they handle that? Right? Or if they're like, I wanted to really spend 2 hours to do this thing, but actually I only have 30 minutes to do this thing. How do they handle that situation? And so every moment becomes an opportunity for you to think about what's the process that the person that I want to be follows? And then how can I apply that process right now in this moment? And so you're not so focused on getting to like a faraway singular outcome. Instead, you're thinking about what's the process that that person has. The person who has that outcome, what's the process that they have? And let me just start applying that process right now. And you can start winning and start being like that person right now. So that's unintuitive tip number one. Don't focus on outcomes, focus on processes. Unintuitive tip number two, show, don't tell. My parents did this really, really well. I don't remember us ever having a conversation about these are our values. This is the kind of person we need you to be. This is the kind of person we are. Maybe we did have those conversations and it totally went out of my memory and it didn't make any kind of impression. But we never had those explicit conversations. Instead, it was all about showing, not telling. And I could see my parents keeping the house really clean and keeping things neat and tidy all the time. And by the way, both my parents worked really hard at that. It wasn't just one person who knew how to do those things. Both my parents were really competent in like running the household. I saw them working really hard. I saw my mom, especially, if there was a spare 5 minutes, 10 minutes, she would always find something to do, right? She'd be like, well, I'll wipe down the countertop. I'll load the dishwasher. I'll do this thing, right? She'd never like a wasted moment. Or I'll give an example from my dad. One thing I saw him do really well, whenever we were in situations where like, you know, the tension was a little high, people are a little grumpy, maybe we're kind of negotiating with someone on a customer service thing and tensions are getting a little high, I would feel the instinct to like be angry or to be forceful, but I would see my dad crack a joke and like lighten the mood and be friendly. And that was the thing I picked up from him was like, oh, when tensions are getting high and things are getting a little like, and you're also kind of maybe getting a little irritated and wanting to like exert your power, actually, you can crack a joke. You can crack a joke, you can lighten the mood. And actually that's often way more effective than like being angry and being forceful, right? All these little things where we never sat down and explicitly talked about this is how you should handle situations. This is the kind of person you should be. Instead, I just absorbed it, right? From just watching them do all the things that they did and watching them react to their own lives. And so when it comes to parenting, this is the biggest secret and the biggest unlock is don't tell them who you want them to be the kind of person you want them to be. React to situations the way you would want them to react in the future to situations, because all of that gets absorbed. All of that gets picked up. I'm sure you have the same thing where you have absorbed so much from your own parents and just all the ways that they operated. And sometimes you don't even realize, right, that the things you absorbed until you find yourself in a similar situation and you're like, whoa, I sound just like my mom. Whoa, I just acted exactly like my dad does. And that's all of that like old kind of the things you picked up, all the things you see suddenly getting like activated in the moment. So it all gets picked up, and don't get discouraged if the, example or that like lesson doesn't get activated until much later. So my parents kept a very, very clean house, for example. I didn't really start getting like neat and clean until I went to college. The whole time I was in like high school and middle school, my room was a mess. I had a huge pile of clothes on the floor of my closet. Everything was super messy. And then it was really when I went to college and then when I moved into my first apartment, that's when it was like a sleeper cell that was like activated in my brain. And I was like, oh, I want things to be neat, because that's how I always saw things growing up. And I suddenly became like a really neat person, even though I was super messy the whole time I was living in my parents' house. And I've seen this happen also a lot with my clients who become parents. They will all of a sudden, it's like those sleeper cells get activated in their brain. And it's like, they're like, wait, hang on, these are my opinions about like, playtime or about like nap time or about like, all these like food or all these things. And they didn't even realize they had those opinions before. It's just these things that they picked up from their own childhood homes that then suddenly get activated once you're in a relevant situation. So don't be discouraged if you're kind of showing, not telling in front of your kids and you're like, they're not picking up any of these lessons. They're acting totally the opposite of how I act. Totally normal. Sometimes it doesn't, like that sleeper cell in their brain doesn't get activated until much, much later, but you're still doing the right thing. You're still doing a good job by showing, not telling. And let me also tell you how this applies to yourself, right? Because it's not only about showing, not telling with your kids, you can also show, not tell with your own brain when you're trying to encourage your brain to act in a different way. And so the opposite of this, telling, right? Telling your brain means like making big, grand statements about what you need to change or what you need to overhaul, right? It's telling yourself things like, I need to get my shit together. I need to be more organized. I need to be more assertive and speak up in meetings. I need to act at a more senior level. You telling your brain, right, what it needs to do. And often it's not as effective. Versus the version of showing your brain what it needs to do is to think about what's a little action I can take right now in this moment to move myself in the direction of who I want to be and the goals I want to achieve, right? That's showing, not telling. And so let me give you some examples. And it's kind of going back to similar to what some of the things I said with the, with the first unintuitive thing. If you're aiming for a promotion, right, you can ask yourself, if I was already at that level, how would I handle the situation, right? If someone gave me a request or an ask for something to do, if I was already at a more senior level, I might actually pause and ask them, what are we solving for, and help guide the direction of their request before I just jump in to immediately start executing. Okay, so let me do that this time. Or if I'm trying to get promoted and I'm in a meeting and someone has a bunch of pushback to something that I'm saying or pushback to something I've been doing, if I was at that more senior level, I wouldn't just agree with them and say, oh, you're right. Okay, let me adjust what I'm doing. I'd actually pause and say, hang on, actually, here's my perspective on that situation. You might think that project I led didn't go well, but actually I did think it went well. And here's why. Or you might think that I'm not the right person to help with this, but I am actually the right person to help with this. And here's why. Right. And so it's about asking yourself, what would that person I want to be? What would they do in this situation? And let me take one step in that direction right now. And that's how you show, don't tell your brain who you want it to be. Because just yelling at yourself, right? Be more assertive, act more senior, don't just say yes, speak up in the meeting, whatever those things might be. That can be less effective than kind of showing your brain, bringing it down to the level of the particular situation that you're in, and then helping yourself see, okay, in this particular moment, no grand statements, right? No broad imperatives for my brain. In this particular moment, right? It's okay, with my to-do list and my 30 minutes left before bed, what would the person I want to be do in this particular situation? And maybe it's I'd spend 30 minutes cracking into that task, or maybe it's I'd let myself rest with no guilt whatsoever. But whatever it is, that's how you show, don't tell with your own brain, is you bring it down to the level of this particular moment, this particular decision, and then ask yourself, the person I want to be, the person I'm aiming to be, how would they handle this situation? And then let me just do that. And that can be a lot more effective than just giving your brain really broad directives of how it should be, but not showing it what that actually looks like. So that's unintuitive tip number 2, show, don't tell. Unintuitive tip number 3 that my parents did to raise 2 daughters with 4 Ivy League degrees. They really did a great job of nurturing our natural interests and just seeing where they would lead. Let me give you some examples. For me, that natural interest was writing. I started writing when I was really young. I was always a super voracious reader as a kid. And then on my 9th birthday, I got the first 3 Harry Potter books. Those were all the books that were out at the time. For my birthday, I read all 3 of them in a day or 2. I just gobbled them up. And then I had such an intense urge to write after I'd finished them. And I literally opened up WordPad on our family computer and I just started writing just stories and things. I just wanted to write. I was just so filled with that urge. And my parents saw that and they were like, that's interesting. She's just in this self-directed way has decided that she wants to write. And so they signed me up for writing classes. And they gave me, there was something called, this probably still exists. There's something called the Center for Talented Youth at Johns Hopkins, CTY. And so they found writing classes through CTY and they enrolled me in them. And you would literally you would do your assignments, you would print them out on the printer, then you would mail them into your tutor or your teacher for the program. And then they would mail back, your results or their comments or whatever it might be. It was so fun. It's that now, of course, I'm sure they email and things, but back then we were literally mailing things to them. And so they signed me up for writing classes. They encouraged me to join the newspaper once I got into high school, but they were like, hey, if this is your interest, let's nurture it and let's see where it leads. What they didn't do was say, well, you have to be an engineer. You have to be a doctor. This writing thing, that makes no money. That doesn't make any sense. That's not on our life plan for you. So stop doing that, and do more math worksheets. That wasn't what they did. For my sister, one of those things was she really loved running. She got into running in middle school. She joined the track team, then she ran through high school as well. And she's still a runner and an athlete. And that was another thing that my parents nurtured that interest, right? They didn't say athletics is a waste of time. You need to focus on school, which is definitely a vibe. And the immigrant parenting of that time, that was definitely a vibe. It's athletics is a waste of time. You should focus on school. They didn't say that. They really had this perspective of this is such a precious thing for a child to be interested in something all by themselves. That's cool. That doesn't always happen, right? You can always force a kid to do things, but it's more unusual and more interesting for a kid to want to do something by themselves. And so they were we should nurture that. Let's just see where it goes. Let's see where that thread leads. And they didn't have a linear perspective on it, right? They weren't oh, you like to writing, so now you have to be a New York Times bestselling author. Oh, you like running, now you have to be an Olympic athlete. They didn't have a perspective on where it would lead. It was much more of let's just follow the thread. Let's see what happens. Because if you are a hardworking person who does your best and you're a good person, right? If you follow the processes that we're instilling in you, then it's going to lead to and at the same time, you are following the thread of what you're naturally interested in, that's going to lead to a good outcome. So we don't have to know exactly what the outcome is. We don't have to force ourselves to a particular outcome. We can just follow the thread of what you're naturally interested in, make sure that you're still being the kind of person and approaching things in that kind of way that represents the values and the processes that we want to live. And then it's going to lead somewhere good. We don't have to know how the story ends. We don't have to know exactly where it's supposed to go. So you can do that for your kids, but you can also do that for yourself, because all of us have often an idea in our head of what we're supposed to do, especially if you've gone to Ivy League schools, worked at prestigious firms, you have like shiny credentials on your resume. All of that can come with a sense of restriction, right? A sense of like, okay, now that I've done all these successful things, I have to keep doing quote unquote successful things. And so now the paths in front of me are limited and I have to do these certain things. I have to make it to a certain level in corporate America. I have to get the partner title, or if I'm going to leave and start my own company, it better be a billionaire tech unicorn company, right? So we get these narrow ideas of what we have to do because of our previous successes. And it can make it more hard to follow what naturally interests us. But the way to apply this to your own life is to follow those threads, follow those things about what you're actually interested in, right? You might have a secret dream of like making kimchi in your kitchen and selling it at the farmer's market, or writing screenplays and telling incredible stories, or a secret dream where you're like, my whole background is in operations, but the thing I'm really interested in is product. Right? And your brain is going to want to shut down these secret dreams, because your brain is going to draw a linear line and it's going to say, see, this is a failure. It's going to say, well, you can't like make a lot of money making kimchi and selling it at the farmer's market. Or it's so hard to be successful in screenwriting. Like 1% of people succeed, and so you're just going to fail if you try. Or it's going to say, well, your whole background is in operations. You can't possibly pivot to product. There's so many product managers in the world. It's never going to happen. So your brain is going to draw like a linear line from your secret dream, and then it's going to shut it down. It's going to say, nope, that's never going to be successful. But instead, I want you to remember, you don't have to draw that linear line. My parents didn't say, oh, you like writing, you have to be a New York Times bestseller. Oh, you like running, you have to be an Olympic marathoner, or any of those things. Instead, just follow the thread. Follow the thread and see where it might lead, and kind of stay open to, I don't know where this might lead. It doesn't have to lead in the most logical direction. If I follow the thread of my natural interests, and if I keep following the processes of how I want to approach all situations, let's just see where it leads. So you don't have to quit your job to explore any of these things, but you can say, hey, if I'm interested in making kimchi and selling it at a farmer's market, let me make some kimchi and then text some friends and see if I can get them to buy any and see what they think about it. If I'm interested in screenwriting, let me write a spec script, or let me like talk to someone who is a screenwriter. If I'm interested in product and my whole background is in ops, let me see if I can, talk my way into some product meetings and learn more about what it's like to be in product. Just take one little step. Right? Start to follow the thread, see where it goes, because it may not lead to like the most logical linear place, but it'll definitely lead to somewhere really interesting. To give you an example, right? Because my parents nurtured my love of writing, I went really deep into wanting to be a writer. And then I made a big right turn. And I was like, actually, being a writer is not going to be super economically viable. I'm going to go ahead and go into business instead. And then I made another turn, and I found a way, which is what I do with coaching now, is I combine the two. I combined my interest in business and my interest in making a livelihood and supporting myself. And I combined that with my interest in writing. And that wouldn't have been possible. I wouldn't have found this career that I'm in now if I hadn't thoroughly explored writing and then turned away from it and then turned back to it. Very similar for my sister. Because they let her explore her love of running, she ran all through middle school, all through high school. That actually led her to then join the crew team when she was an undergrad. She was a coxswain on the women's crew team. That was an incredible experience for her. It taught her so much hard work and grit and drive. She led the Princeton women's crew team to their first ever NCAA championship, which was absolutely insane. So it was just an incredible story of like growth and hard work and drive for her. And being on the crew team also opened up a whole world of like relationships and a network that she wouldn't have had otherwise, right? So you can't necessarily predict where nurturing that interest is going to go. My parents couldn't possibly have predicted that nurturing my interest in writing would lead to me going and getting an MBA, but then also starting a coaching business, right? And they couldn't have predicted for my sister that nurturing her interest in running would lead to her being a coxswain on the crew team, getting an NCAA championship, and then also, not making athletics her whole career and having a whole career outside of that. So you don't necessarily know where it's going to go. So I want you to just keep yourself very, very open and just follow the thread. Follow the thread of your own interests or let your kids follow the thread of their interests. And as long as you're doing that combination of I'm following the thread of what naturally interests me, and I'm still sticking to my values, I'm still sticking to my processes of how I want to approach situations, then let's just stay open and curious and see what comes out of this, because I don't necessarily know what the answer is. And that leads perfectly into unintuitive thing number 4 that my parents did, which is they had an orientation that was like, I don't know. I don't know the answer. I don't know the pathway you're supposed to be on. I don't know exactly what you're supposed to be doing right now. That was kind of their orientation. And it's funny, I saw a post on LinkedIn last week, and someone was talking about a friend of theirs that they had. And that friend had like a full multi-decade plan to get their kids into the Ivy League. And their kids were like 2 and 3, right? Or something like that, super, super young. And their friend had mapped out the whole plan to be like, this is what they're going to do in elementary school and middle school and high school. These are all the things they're going to do, and that's going to lead them to the Ivy League. And what that person is doing when they make that kind of like rigid 15-year plan for their kids is that person is assuming, I know the answer. I know the pathway. I know the exact steps that my kids have to take. And now we just have to execute, right? Whereas my parents' orientation was much more, I don't know the answer. I don't know exactly where you're supposed to end up. I don't know the exact steps of the pathway to get there. I don't know, right? And it wasn't like a defeatist, I don't know. It wasn't like, I don't know. I'm just going to give up. I can't control anything. I might as well just not try. It wasn't that flavor of I don't know. It was an open and a curious I don't know, right? It was like, I don't know. I don't know what the right answer is. Well, let's explore some hypotheses. Let's think about what the answer could be. Let's get some data and adjust. It was that open and curious I don't know, not the defeated, closed off, let's just give up kind of I don't know. And when you have that really open, curious I don't know, it encourages you to go get data, to go try things and say, well, I don't know, but here's a hypothesis. So then let me go do something and then see if my hypothesis was proven or not proven. And let's just explore and figure it out as we go. Versus when you tell yourself, I do know, I know the answer, I know the plan, what happens is you get really stuck on that plan, right? You put your blinders on, you ignore everything else that's happening, ignore any potential new opportunities, new ideas, new inputs, and you get stuck on this plan, but you made the plan when you had the least possible amount of data. Right? As time goes on, you have the opportunity to gather more and more data and improve on that plan so much. But when you're fixated on, I know the answer, you stick to a plan that is like the least informed by data that it could possibly be. And you close yourself off to new data, new information, and new insights. So this attitude of I don't know is really what enabled them to do tip number 3, which was nurture our interest and see where it leads, right? For writing and for my sister and with running for my sister, because their mindset was, I don't know. I don't know the answer. I don't know where you're supposed to end up. I don't know, I don't know what the steps are. Also, because they weren't focused on outcomes, right? But they were just focused on processes. They were able to say, okay, we're still going to bring our values and we're still going to teach you the processes that we want you to follow, but we don't know where you're supposed to end up. So let's just go explore and let's let you go and explore and like gather more data as you go. And I think this is especially true for parents today because things are changing so fast. Right? AI is completely disrupting the job market. The technology situation is completely different than it was when we were kids. We didn't really experience social media or smartphones until we were teens, right? The iPhone came out in 2008. I was 18 when it came out. And I think I was in high school or I was in college. I was in college when Facebook first came out. Right. And so I had a long childhood with no technology, or certainly not with social media, no smartphones. And then it got introduced much later. Right. And YouTube wasn't even a thing until I was much older. Whereas kids now, technology is available from the moment that they're born and technology is getting even more advanced. Right. And so all the more so, I think that makes it really important to say, I don't know. Right? I don't know what the right answer is, and we have to try things to figure it out. And I think because life is so different now than it was when you grow up. And so if you come in with really fixed ideas thinking, I know the answer, you're going to miss everything that's changed, and you're going to miss adapting and figuring out what's the best way to handle and parent your kids in this particular situation. And I think it was really similar for my parents too, because they emigrated to the US when I was 5. Right? So they grew up in one cultural context, and then they moved me and my sister to a completely different cultural context. Everything was different. Life was totally, totally different. Values were different. The way that parents interacted with their kids was different. The school system was different. Everything was different where they were in the US. And you would think that would make them get really strict, right? And really structured and say, no, we're so scared by the unfamiliarity of everything that we have to tell ourselves we do know the answer. So blinders on and just execute the answer that we know is right. And instead, they managed to stay really open and stay really curious and say, okay, things are really different. Here's what we think is right. Here's what we think is not right. Let's grow, let's explore, let's try things, and let's stay open to figuring out what's good about the differences. And we stay open to figuring out what doesn't quite work and build our own way of doing things. So that's kind of how to apply it to your parenting. But I think this applies to yourself too, right? Going back to that idea of like, if you have interests and, threads that your brain wants to follow, but you're thinking that doesn't make any sense, right? That doesn't make any money, whether it's whatever your secret dream is, right? Whether it's making kimchi or doing screenwriting or moving from ops to product, your brain will be like, I know the answer. Right? You'll be like, I know the answer. I know what happens if you follow those paths. You make no money. You become totally unsuccessful. No one gives you the job that you're looking for. People just shut their door in their face and you're a total failure, right? Your brain will be like, I know the answer. And that's the answer. And that's why you shouldn't do that thing. Versus when you have the orientation of, I don't know. I don't know the answer. I don't know how my story turns out. I don't know where this path might lead, but it's that open, curious, I don't know, not the sad, shut down, defeatist, I don't know. Then what that encourages you to do is to say, okay, well, let me start exploring because I don't know. So I have to do something to figure out what it might be. All I do know is that I have a little bit of a pull in this direction. I'm kind of naturally interested in something. And I know the kind of person I want to be. I know the kind of processes I want to follow. Okay, well, let me just explore and see what I can figure out by trying to follow that thread. All right, and then that brings us to the final unintuitive tip, the unintuitive thing my parents did to raise us, which is when we got stressed or when we got stuck, my parents did a really good job of letting us talk and problem solving together with us instead of telling us the answer or telling us what to do. So I think this is really hard because when your kids or when someone you love is struggling or stuck or in pain or facing a challenge, all you want to do is solve it for them, right? You just want to swoop in and say, this is what you should major in, or you should stick with that activity, or you should quit that activity, or this is the job you should take, right? You just want to solve the problem and eliminate their pain by just telling them exactly what to do, right? That is so much the temptation when you see someone in love being in pain or just kind of struggling with something. And especially when you combine that with, I know the answer, right? If you have the orientation, like I know the answer, I know the steps of the pathway. And if you're thinking, well, the goal is to get to the outcome, that's the really important thing is you have to get to the outcome, then all the more so you'll be so tempted to just swoop in and tell the answer and say like, this is what you have to do, just do that, right? My parents did a really good job of not doing that. And instead kind of saying, well, let's figure it out together. Let's problem solve it together. What do you think? What do we think? And let's problem solve it together. So let me give you an example. I mentioned a little bit about wanting to be a writer. So I started writing when I was really young, really cultivated my interest in writing thanks to my parents' support. I was an English major when I was an undergrad, and I also started taking screenwriting classes when I was an undergrad. And I really got super excited about screenwriting. Out of all the different formats of writing, I was like, this is really fun. I think this is the one for me. I want to be a screenwriter. Right. So I threw myself into screenwriting and then I wanted to, once I got to kind of junior year, I was like, I want to move to LA and try to be a screenwriter. And so I came back and I told my parents that, right? Which was like totally not on their radar and like very surprising. That was not something that they had imagined would be my career. And the thing they did, instead of telling me the answer, right? Instead of being like, no, don't do that. That's a terrible idea. They were like, how can you explore this? That sounds great. How can you explore this further? How can you learn more about this? And what I realized was there's a great program in Harvard undergrad called Harvardwood. It still exists. If you're interested in the entertainment industry, I highly recommend that you go join it. It's a great alumni organization, but it's basically for Harvard alums that are in Hollywood and like in the entertainment industry, because Harvard has a ton of alumni, both on the business side and on the creative side of the industry. And Harvardwood did this like G-term program. So it was like January between the two semesters. They used to do this program, I think they still do it, where they took you out to LA. They take you out to LA for a month and you meet agents and managers and producers and writers, and you learn how a project comes together and you learn the role that everybody plays. And if you're interested in different kind of career pathways, this is the starting point and this is how you progress, right? So there's an incredible educational program that they ran to really help you understand how does this industry work? And if you want to build a career in this, like how do you get started? And so my parents were like, great, you should do that. You should absolutely go learn more about how this works and what your career path would actually look like if you were a screenwriter, right? So they didn't tell me the answer. They told me, go figure it out, to go learn more and then tell us what you find out. So I went and I did that program and then I did an internship after that. And I came back from that and I was like, nope, I don't want to be a screenwriter. Never mind. Because I was like, and this was just the intuition that I had was, and not saying you should be a screenwriter. If you want to be a screenwriter, you should still explore it for yourself. But the intuition I had coming out of that month was I was like, there is too much supply and not enough demand. There are too many people that can call themselves writers because every idiot with a laptop, myself included, can just call themselves a writer. And there's not that many spots in these writers' rooms and there's not that many shows. And by the way, every show has to like get a lot of viewers. There's a lot of pressure on every show. And if you have to get a lot of viewers, it has to be appealing to the mass market. And my cute little creative projects are not necessarily appealing to the mass market, nor am I really excited about being very appealing to the mass market. right? I was like, I don't want to go like work on a show that I think is kind of hacky just to like get my career started. That was one insight I had. The other insight that I had was they talked a lot about like, in order to make it in the industry, you have to be a self-starter at like a crazy level. Like if like you can't get any jobs, you can't get any opportunities, then you have to be like, okay, me and my 5 friends are putting on a play, and we're just going to uphold it in this church basement, and we're going to invite all our friends to come to this play, right? Or like now it would be much more about like, I'm going to make sketches on YouTube, or I'm going to make sketches on Instagram, and I'm just going to put them out there, right? So you have to be such a self-starter to get yourself going. And I, at the time, knowing myself, I was like, that's not a good structure for me. Like I was really struggling in college with long deadlines and lack of structure. I was procrastinating a lot. I wasn't able to be as productive as I wanted to be. And I was like, I can't trust myself to move to LA and just self-start my way into a writing career. Like that's going to be really dangerous for me because I don't have the tools to be really productive without a lot of structure. Now I do, but back then I didn't. And so I knew that would be like a dangerous situation to put myself in, because I was like, there's a high chance I move to LA and just sit and watch Netflix the whole time and like don't do any work. And that would be very bad, right? And so I came back and I told my parents all this. And I was like, okay, now that I went out and gathered the information, this is what I've learned. And actually, I don't think this is a good idea for me anymore, right? And that's so different than them telling me you shouldn't do this, right? For them to say, hey, go explore, learn more information, and tell us what you find. What that created for me is I didn't have to lose face with them, right? If they had said, this is a terrible idea, you shouldn't do it, and then I went and explored it anyway, it would be really hard for me to come back and say, oh yeah, you were right, this is a terrible idea, right? Because I would feel like I'm rebelling, like I wanted to rebel against them. And then it's sort of like shameful, or I'm losing face to come back and say like, oh, you were right. We avoided all that drama by them just saying, we don't know the answer, but you should go figure it out. And then it was really easy for me to come back and say, actually, I've massively changed my mind. Actually, I think I might've been wrong. It was really easy to do that because they hadn't set up this adversarial dynamic where they were telling me what to do and I was rebelling against them. And then it's like really shameful to come back and admit they were right. None of that was happening because they were like, we don't know, but let's problem solve together. Why don't you go get some information? And it was really easy for me to come back and say, this information has changed my mind. And now I want to go in a different direction. And there was no like rebellion, saving face, like dynamic that was happening at all in that. So it was so, so valuable. And they might have known the answer all along, right? Knowing me, knowing my personality, knowing my preferences, it's possible that they totally knew the answer all along, but they still were like, why don't you go find out some information and come back to us, right? And they let me get to the answer myself. And by the way, it's the same even now in my business. I talk to my parents all the time about my business, and they are so great about letting me talk and figure things out, and offer suggestions, or they'll kind of like help nudge me along. But it's never, hey, here's what you have to do to grow your business. Here's what you have to do next. It's always like, well, why don't you just talk it out with me and see what you find? And I'll give you a couple suggestions and let's figure it out together. And it's so valuable because it does 2 things. One, it builds our relationship, right? It builds this partnership relationship instead of this adversarial relationship where they're telling me what to do and I'm either following them or I'm rebelling against them. So that's one really valuable thing it builds. The second thing it builds is my own problem solving ability, right? It helps me build the skill of saying, okay, I don't know the answer. What information do I have to go gather? How do I figure this out? Okay, now I have a hypothesis. How do I test the hypothesis? And how do I continually refine as I go? I built that skill because my parents kept asking me, we don't know. What do you think? What information can you gather to figure that out? And you do that enough times, you really start to build the skill of figuring things out versus building the skill of me just relying on them all the time, right? If they had said, this is the answer, this is the answer, this is the answer again and again, the only skill I would have built is listening to my parents, right? Not the skill of figuring things out for myself. So that's something you can do with your kids is when they're struggling with something, when they're in front of a challenge, when they're stuck on a decision, not coming in and just saying, this is the answer, right? To save them the pain of the indecision or the struggle and to keep them on track, for their outcomes and keep them on the correct path that you know what the right answer is. Instead of doing that, really kind of saying, well, we don't know either, but let's figure it out. How would you find the answer to that question? What would you want to do to try to figure that out? What's your hypothesis? What are some steps you can take? And doing that not only builds like a great partnership relationship with your kids, but it also helps them build the skill of figuring things out. Because the reality is the things that they're struggling with when they're younger, they're lower stakes, right? And you can fail a bunch and it's actually going to be okay. And it prepares you for the higher stakes things that you have to figure out later. And so if it takes them, I don't know, a couple of months to figure out an effective way to study for a math test, that's actually a low stakes situation at the end of the day. And then that can translate into when they're working, they are able to figure out how to like learn new skills in a higher stakes situation. So things can feel really high stakes even when your kids are young, but the reality is the stakes are low and the pressure is low when they're young. These aren't super risky situations. And it's a great chance for them to practice figuring out how to problem solve and figuring out how to approach things. You can also do this with yourself and with your own brain, right? And so going back to those examples of, of like trying to get a promotion or trying to be more productive, the tell yourself the answer version of this is just to sort of yell at yourself, right? And be like, just speak up in the meeting or you're not going to get promoted, or just buckle down and keep working and like, don't take a break, right? That's the version of just telling yourself what you think you should be doing. The opposite of that is working with your brain, right? So for example, if you're trying to speak up more in meetings, but you're finding it hard to do, what you want to do is to say, well, hang on, what's the part of me that wants to stay quiet? Why does it want to stay quiet? I bet it has some good logic for that. Oh, it's thinking that it's risky to speak up and I don't want to look stupid in front of really senior people. And it's also thinking, I don't know the answer. I don't know enough about the situation to like actually contribute, right? Oh, got it. Those are the reasons why I'm hesitating to speak up. That makes a lot of sense. Okay, but I still want to speak up. So how would I speak up and still manage the risk of not looking stupid and not knowing a lot about the topic that we're talking about, right? And so working with your brain, kind of saying, hey, I bet there's some good ideas and good logic in the part of me that doesn't want to speak up, but there's also good ideas and good logic in the part of me that does want to speak up. And so let me help those two parts of my brain work together and come to the answer that makes sense instead of just telling my brain the answer and forcing it to do it, right? Or same thing, if you're telling yourself like, just buckle down and do more work instead of taking a break, instead you can work with those two parts of your brain to say, okay, one part of me wants to take a break. Why is that? What's the logic? What's the reasoning for that? And then one part of me wants to keep working. Okay, what's the logic? What's the reasoning for that? And then how do we bring those two together? What's the answer between those two perspectives? How would we figure that out? And so that's how you can work with your brain and not just tell your brain the answer, but really help your brain figure out what is the best pathway forward, is to work with the two parts of your brain. One wants one thing, one wants the other thing, and assume both of them have good logic. Let me pull out the good logic that both of them have and then see what's the integrated path forward. And same thing, it's going to help you build a less adversarial relationship with yourself, where you're not pushing yourself and forcing yourself to do things all the time and then breaking down and rebelling, right? But instead you have more of a partnership with yourself, right? Same as like with me and my parents, it wasn't this adversarial thing. You have to do this. No, I'm going to do this instead. It was a partnership of like, I want to do this. Okay, well, let's see what that would look like. And let's explore that. Much more of a partnership. And then you can productively move forward. And it helps your brain build the skill of deciding what to do, given all the different parts of you and all the different agendas and different desires that the parts of you might have, and to figure out how to reconcile those and move forward in an integrated way, rather than feeling like you always have to rely on external rules, external guidance, and just overrule the parts of you that just don't want to do things. So, okay, that is it. That's it for the 5 unintuitive things that my parents did to raise 2 kids with 4 Ivy League degrees. And I want to tell you, everything that I just talked about is just the tip of the iceberg. I really want you to come to the event that I'm running this week. It's called Intergenerational Wisdom for High Achieving Moms. I cannot wait for you guys to attend this fireside chat. Like I said, it's with my mom, and it's also with Kelly Huang, another super high achieving Asian immigrant mom who raised 2 successful and happy kids. It is your opportunity to hear directly from the horse's mouth. You can actually hear from the women who have done it, who did the hard work of balancing their successful careers with raising kids and raise kids that are not only successful, but also happy, who don't hate them and who still have great relationships with them. So I want you to be able to hear directly from them, ask them your questions, get their advice, and then I'll also be there to help translate that advice and make it relevant to your situation and your kids and your life, and figure out how you can actually implement it. I want you to come to that event because, like I said, this episode is the tip of the iceberg, and I want you to hear directly from them exactly how they did it. That event is on February 12th. If you can't make the exact time that the event is, I want you to register anyway, because we're going to send you the recording as long as you register. And if you're listening to this after February 12th, 2006 or 2026, absolutely no worries. You can still get your hands on the recording. So just go to the show notes and I'll have a link set up for you to be able to get a recording from the event. I am so excited to see you guys there. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Aligned Ambition podcast. Make sure to subscribe if you haven't already, and share this podcast with anyone you know that you think could use it. If you'd like to explore working together in a one-on-one coaching engagement with me, book a free consult call at poojavcoaching.com/contact. You can grab that link in the episode description. And if you have any questions, thoughts, or topics you want me to cover in this podcast, shoot me an email at pooja@poojavcoaching.com. You can grab that in the episode description too. Talk to you soon.